was this all came out of a movement of the 60s, right?
So the overlap of the Frankfurt School and Marcuse,
Mm-hmm.
I never knew.
Yeah, Marcuse.
End of the 60s, and then 70s, 80s was kind of like postmodern.
Okay, now stop right there. Stop right there because I want to make a point. I want to make a point. And correct me if I'm wrong, fellas, on this. The black family unit was 80% two-parent homes in 1960. If I'm looking up, if I remember my Thomas Sowell correctly, okay, 80% two-parent homes. Now there was obvious discrimination happening in the South and all over the country, right? Because of Jim Crow. That is not to be argued. But the black family stood strong through a lot of that, through up into the majority of that. Yeah, a majority of that. You hear Larry Elder talk about this a lot. You hear Coleman Hughes talk about this a lot, of how the black experience and I'm not speaking. I'm not black, obviously, but
you ain't gotta say that.
Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying that they stood strong against adversity that most people or most groups maybe wouldn't have been able to stand through, right? Yeah. But I want to bring up the timeline is my point of this, right? The timeline is you had the Great Society in the 1960s with Lyndon Johnson that literally incentivized the breakdown or the deconstruction of the black family because you got more money if you only had a one-person home, right? That was part of it, right? Absolutely. Which removed, in a very real way, the men are a masculine influence over the children, right? And what masculinity was. So that was the first step. And then you talk about the ideologies that were coming to fruition at that time, whether we're talking about Derrida, we're talking about the postmodernists that Steve is mentioning. This is not a coincidence, is what I'm saying. Then you have Roe versus Wade, 1972, right? And then you have you even down to getting things off the gold standard, because taking things off the gold standard meant you had nothing. What we mentioned earlier, money was not attached to reality anymore. Money was an idea. It was an idea.
Whatever everyone agreed it was.
And now we've moved into this. It just seems to keep going and going. And like you said, they seem to have beta tested it on the black community, I believe.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about that a little bit from your experience, because I think it's huge. I think people need to understand that part of the reason they treat black conservatives like Kevin here, or like Larry Elder, or like Candace Owens, like worse than they would ever treat me. You know what I mean? Is because they are antithetical to the narrative.
Herschel Walker, the headlines talking about him, how smart he sounds. Like some of the headlines I saw from the left newspapers
he sounds so biased.
I'm just saying, like, things that you would never expect. That would never fly from a conservative newspaper.
Yeah, no, it would never fly. The blackface of white supremacy. Go ahead, Gary.
I don't want to speak on that. I'm making a point that y'all got my point.
Yeah,
that stuff is very irritating that they do that.
Well, they call you all horrible names. You know what I mean? They treat you worse than they would ever treat me. I mean, talk to us about this for a second, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you watch The View, or you watch anything else, you watch entertainment, the things they said about Herschel Walker was disgusting.
Yes.
The things they say about Candace Owens, the things that these people have said to my wife. My wife, has a pretty decent following, and she has had a few things go viral, and then here comes the flood of things in her DMs of all these white liberals saying these horrible things to her. These people, it threatens. And like you said, it threatens everything that they're trying to deconstruct.
The sad part is that we are the worst people to come at like that. I mean, we war like that on a regular basis. Like you don't want to war with me on that, baby. Like you want to leave that one alone. You need to understand. I will murder you. Don't you?
Well, don't say that. Don't say that. Yeah. Well, it's YouTube, man. So you just gotta. But yes. So
my point is that I'm not going to back down simply because you think you are who you are. I play the game so I can get money. I'm not a pushover.
Right.
Not even close.
So what do you mean play the game? What do you mean?
Okay, so I have to play the game. Yes, sir. I have to give you my You want to know why my name is Gary Lamb?
What?
Because Deontay Johnson won't get an interview. That's why my name is Gary Lamb. My mom and father was very wise with our names.
Okay.
Because they didn't want to give us a name that was black.
Mm-hmm.
So when I walk in,
it
and this is
almost sounds like when the Irish came over from came into America, they changed their name and
right, just to blend in, just to blend in.
Yeah, because
it's the same thing.
Group preference.
Unfortunately, unlike the Irish, I have a calling card. Every time I walk into a place, they see me immediately. Oh, you're Gary Lamb? Yes. You've never seen that look. I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. You walk into a place, they wasn't expecting a black guy, and that deer in the headlights look like, oh, yeah, where you? And now they're starting to find a way to, not have you, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Dequalify you. They started looking for ways to disqualify you. And it's like, that's prevalent. A lot of black people have experienced that. I'm not saying it's as big as some make it be, because let's face it, some people
well, there are racists.
Well, no,
okay,
but what I'm saying
is but it's not a structural thing, right? I'm talking about on
an individual level,
right.
So but you won't know that, because it's not like Patrice O'Neill said this before. He said, we all know that racism exists, but I never see it, because nobody tells you it's racism. Oh, this is the reason why we disqualified you. You're overly qualified. You're this, and we've been hearing this for years. It's not something new. We've constantly heard that, but we still hear it today. Till this day, we still hear those excuses why we didn't get a job, and we're like, do. Is that the real reason why I didn't get a job?
But here we can get down to how prevalent that is. So if you're listening to Larry Elder, if you listen to Coleman Hughes, they talk about. Obviously, the things you're talking about do exist. There's no question about that. That has happened, but it doesn't just exist against the black community. It exists against Asians. And now what we just mentioned earlier, it exists against men, right?
Yeah. Hold on. Let me say this. I understand that it exists against others, but nobody is as dysfunctional and in danger and need of support than the blacks.
Okay.
We have no infrastructure. We have nothing in place that we can plug each other in. We can't flip our datas for nothing, because everything we get goes right back out. We can't get nothing to stay.
What's the reason for it?
We can call anything businesses, infrastructure, knowledge, know-how. We can call it anything. But
because the family was deconstructed.
But that's the bottom line, is that there's no real reason.
Families build businesses, families build wealth.
There you go.
And so when you have the deconstructionists, they the Great Society.
Right.
Tying back to that, I mean, that decimates a community. When you don't have fathers, you're not going to have businesses.
No,
you're not going to have generational wealth. You don't have any of those things. That's why, Africans that come over, African immigrants that come over from Africa, they tend to do a lot better than even whites. And they're right up there, right below Asians, because they believe in keeping the families together. So they build this wealth and they pass it to their kids. And they believe in, like Kamala Harris's parents. Look at them and their great grandparents. They passed on wealth for generations throughout their Caribbean family.
I got a guitar,
and but
I got a guitar.
Well,
see, that's what I'm saying. Like, I got a guitar for when my dad died. He left me a guitar and an amp. That's what I got. That was my inheritance.
Really?
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. So this is.
But let me tell you something. Let me just break this paradigm in half. I'm a poor white kid. When my dad died, I didn't get a guitar. I got a broken fishing pole. You know what I mean? Because they never owned a home, never graduated high school. You know what I'm saying? So it's not so much, especially in America, as America's progressed, because the breakdown of the family, I think, started with the black community when you talked about how the welfare system was kind of targeting that group as a measure, because they represented the more of the poor people in the country at that point, right? They're just by numbers. But if you want to go true numbers, there was still way more poor white people. And you talk about Appalachia, and this is why that I think CRT is so destructive, because CRT creates races where there wouldn't be before, right? Because it pits poor white people against poor black people who all experience pretty much the same thing for the same reasons, which is my family didn't have any generational wealth. You know what I mean? And my dad used to get pulled over because they knew who my dad was. And they would see him and pull him over. Why? Because he had done stupid things before, right? It didn't matter the color of his skin. And you know what he told me? He said, son, this is my fault because I did dumb things, or because sometimes the kind of car he drove. But
can you say that again?
That my father used to drive around Yeah, get close to the mic. My father used to drive around, and because of who he was, because of the way he looked, because they knew who he was, used to get pulled over 2 or 3 times a week. And
no, what did you say about his fault?
About his fault?
Yes.
Yeah, that he had done things in the past, or he even that he.
This is not my
but
fault.
No,
Wait,
but hold on. I'm not done. I'm not done. That his family had done things because it started with him when he was young. So whether it's I'm not talking about the color of his skin. I'm talking about the reputation.
But I am. You're talking about a reputation that you created for yourself.
No, he didn't create it for himself at the beginning.
Okay.
It was because he was part of a class system. It was because he was poor. It was because his parents had been.
You can say all that.
It was because of where he lived in the city.
You can say all that, and still say, if he would have chose differently, he could have had a better life.
No,
correct?
that's not what I'm saying. No, because it started out that way.
But I can say that.
Why?
Because
do you know my father?
No, I'm saying I'm looking at you right now, and I could tell you right now that if your father or your lineage would have chose a different path, they could probably got it by him.
But if they chose a different path, right? Larry Eldo chose a different path. You know what I'm saying? My point is that it's not. This happened with. Let me use this as an example. This happened with.
Okay. Let me
just one second. So this happened. What is the Occupy Wall Street? So Tim Pool talks about this, right? Occupy Wall Street had a good goal. They were going after the class-based system of what's wrong here, guys? No, they were going after a class-based system of after the 2008 drawdown, after the stock market crash and all of that happened, right? Occupy Wall Street started going after the financial institutions that were taking advantage of all people, poor people alike, that drained their pension funds, that destroyed families. And what Tim Pool talks about is that when he was on the ground there, is that instantly that movement was taken over by people who jumped in and said, well, this is about being black and this is about being white. Right, the black people have it worse than poor white people, and what I'm saying is that is part of the postmodern manipulation. Is that if we take it down, I'm not saying that there's not a difference between the way people are treated based upon their skin color, but it's not universal, it's not systemic, because it's done to people based upon where they come from, what their last names are, all across the world, not even just in the United States, and they use that as a cudgel to split us, all of us, from going after what the real problem is, which is a higher level order of people who literally feed off of the misfortune of other people.
How long do you think if we decided to call a truce before someone infiltrates that truce with the same crap that got us here today?
Well, that's why we got to get away from these groups.
Right.
That's the problem. You have to be decentralized to where there's no groups. Because if you have a group, it can be infiltrated. If everyone's just trying to go for freedom and everyone's just trying to be an individual, then there's no infiltrating that. But they have to break us down into groups, because when they break you down into groups, then you identify with that group, and then they can start building up these wedges between the different groups and creating different factions.
Yep.
Right.
Intersectionality by definition is separating every identity into two groups and saying that one exploits the other, and it's a zero-sum game. So, there's a pie, and what one side doesn't get, the other side is getting, and it's exploitative. And that's the lens that looks at everything, right. and that's kind of the programming that's running in the background.
Let me just break this down when he talks about intersectionality. So that's where we see the bifurcation of, well, the people at the hierarchy would be a trans black male or female would be considered the most oppressed group in the country. So they're the ones that should have the biggest outsized voice. This is Kimberly Crenshaw. This is the creator of critical race theory. She talks about an intersectionality that if you are a white cisgendered male, right, regardless of whatever, if you want to use all that language, then you are from a group that has done the most oppressing over history, meaning that your ancestors are
most
likely
legitimacy to talk about anything else. And that's why you kind of hear people say nowadays, like as a cis white able-bodied right. male speaking on topics of this, it is coming from the logic stemming from these right. thinkers.
And what they're saying is that if you are a trans black female, that is like the most oppressed group over history, then they should get the outsized voice. So it's what Ibram Kendi says, the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. That's what he says. The only remedy for present discrimination is future discrimination, meaning that you have to flip that hierarchy. Is that because you are black and I'm white, you should get an outsized portion because your family probably got less of a portion before, but that doesn't take my story into account, right? I'm an individual because my family came up with nothing. I'm out of nothing. I'm the first person in 6 generations to graduate high school, the first person to go to college, the first person to do anything like that, and I grew up poor. So what it does is it takes, and that's what I noticed at the beginning was, because I was huge into studying the civil rights movement. I've read every book that Martin Luther King ever read. I studied that era because it interested me so much, because I identified with all the plight that was going on, and my family was born in that time, so I'd hear stories. But what I noticed is that, wait a minute, I took myself out of it and I looked at it from the top and I said, this is going to cause the poor white people to hate the poor black people. This is going to cause the poor black people to hate the poor white people. And why is this happening? Because we had largely, not perfectly, gotten past a large portion of what existed in the 60s and the 70s, right? Not saying there wasn't bad feelings, not saying there are things that didn't need to still be fixed, but we made progress, right? Would you agree with that? We made progress on the racial front. It was not perfect, but we made progress. And now it seems like they want to recreate that